that's typically the hardest part of the story. It's like, okay, I can figure out a product and I can go develop that product. But if I'm not able to talk about the product or get people engaged in that story that we're developing for the product, it's not really going to hit it off. And so that's the one thing I really want to stress to people. It's all about that audience building.
Hey everyone, Mark here. Welcome to this episode of Masters of Crowdfunding. Today I chatted with Rico Evangelho, who is the owner of Hit Point Press. It was super interesting. I found it super interesting because they've been in the space now for a really long time. They've launched 16 campaigns on Kickstarter. I've built a whole business around this. And that's what I dove into a lot. I tried to ask a lot of questions about the whole business behind Hit Point Press, not only how it started, but how it runs today and what goes into actually building a whole business that has Kickstarter as a cornerstone of the business strategy. So whether you're in the Dungeons & Dragons space or in the tabletop game space or not, you're going to, I think, learn a lot about how to build a business off of Kickstarter in this episode. So I hope you enjoy it. All right, Rico, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me here today.
Of course. So we were talking right before this. You've done 16 launches now on Kickstarter, which I think was a surprise to you. I don't think you remember that.
No, 16 seems like a large number, but I feel like it feels less, but also feels like there's so many more. Like in a course of a year, there can be 3 to 5 that we're currently running. But I remember way back when was like 2017 was the first one we were involved with.
Yeah, exactly.
So you probably think the first one we did was the Deck of Many, right?
Yes.
There's actually one before that we were involved with, which was the Magic Art Show Las Vegas, where we helped run a Magic the Gathering art show in Vegas with a whole bunch of other people who were really into Magic the Gathering art. And so that's where I really started figuring out and understanding the space of Kickstarter and using that as a way to stepstone into making my own campaign.
All right. That's very good information to know. I do want to get back to that. But first, before they do that, I'd love to know, just tell everyone what is Hit Point Press, and then we'll go back to the beginning of how you guys started with even that campaign I didn't know about, and just the origin stories of Hit Point Press. So what is it?
Hit Point Press is a tabletop games and accessory manufacturer specializing in games or products for 5th edition of the Dragons and accessories for Magic the Gathering.
Awesome. And now let's go back to the beginning. I'd love to know how Hit Point Press started. Maybe weave in how that first campaign that I didn't know about played into the origin story as well. If it did, that'd be awesome to hear that story.
The origins is 2015. It's way back then. Basically, my other company is a digital entertainment agency, and they currently, a lot of their focus is developing e-commerce sites. But before 2015, we were trying to make Facebook games or iPhone games or just trying different things and developing stuff. Wasn't working for us, and we pivoted into e-commerce. And I said, well, if we're going to be doing that, I need to build my own site. As a designer in the company, I was like, okay, I'm going to build my own site, test a product out there, just so we can say, hey, we have a success, and show that to our clients and show that to our customers. The easy thing I decided to develop was actually a line of gaming tokens for Magic the Gathering called Cardamajigs. And I did a first print run. I developed it by selling some duels from Magic the Gathering and started making little card runs and promoting it through Reddit and just trying to see what kind of stuck in terms of developing an e-commerce brand. That ended up working. We started developing different kinds of projects and experimenting. It got to a point where it wasn't just a side thing anymore. I actually needed to bring people in to help assist and push out the shipments that I was making for that thing, as well as me helping manage the other business that I was working on there. My first employee that I hired, he was working with me, and he made the recommendation that the 5th edition had the SRD, which allowed us to produce content for it. And if anything, he wants to make reference cards for himself. Would we be interested in trying something out like that? So I commissioned him to start developing art. I did the design and helped create this look and feel of the Deck of Many. And we kind of started taking the company into developing role-play accessories at that point with our first line of decks. From there, we've done animated products to campaign settings to even a line of card frames. We like to experiment in products that we would like to see as creators in terms of just like being collectors, but also being players at the same time.
Got it. So, okay, so going back to 2015, if I'm following you correctly, you had this entertainment business, correct?
An agency that develops e-commerce sites right now.
Okay, got it. And then from there to like launching the first Kickstarter, was your plan to like try to make something that was going to be your completely brand new thing with Hit Point Press, or this was like a side project that turned into a much bigger thing?
I think it was more of a test in the market because we were focused purely on Magic the Gathering in terms of what we were building and developing. And so we knew that existed. What was interesting is we tried to build up an audience by actually mailing people prototypes because we had our own printer and cutting machine in my office. And so we could just make cards and ship them out to people and see what people actually really thought. So we built up our audience through snail mail. And and through our first campaign, we raised $60,000, which we were excited for. We were looking for 5K. And instead, we got 12 times that, which, blew our expectations.
So once that happened, then what? So the test has now been proven. What did you do next?
The test had now been proven. I guess it was finishing the project, making sure we could actually get the product out there and to the people. After we had completed the run and fulfilled it, it was developing the next idea. Because before, everything was based on e-commerce and just selling things and selling these tokens that we had created. But now we knew we could get these really big events that could give us a large funding to really accelerate and move things forward. Before, we'd have to test something out and maybe spend $1,000 and hopefully we'll get that $1,000 back in a test. But if we can say, okay, we've built a proof of concept, raise a whole bunch of money, and then be able to actually develop and build the product out, there's a lot of cool opportunities. In the Magic space and the tokens we developed, some of the tokens were animated. We had been tinkering with those cards, and it had been a success in that space. So the next campaign, I believe, was animated spells, where we did spell cards that animated. We actually have one here that we did recently, actually the past couple months, where we did an anime Eldritch Blast because we ended up going to Tokyo to showcase our animated spells cards. So we try to make a Japanese version of the cards. But we've been doing these animations since 2016. And we've animated over 600 cards by now. And so that was the next project to really show that we were doing cool things and trying to innovate in the space, not just doing, hey, here's cards yet. We want to try to do something new each time.
If anyone's listening to this, you have to watch the YouTube video. You have to go on YouTube and see that animation that Rico just held up, because it kind of blow your mind. That was really cool. So, but again, I'm going back to this starting point. So you had this agency, you did this test, it was successful. Now what happens to the agency? Are you still working on this or working on both?
I stayed with the agency for another 3 years, but basically we had run animated spells by that point, which raised... Actually, no, sorry. We had developed... Our second campaign was actually a Cube Magic's campaign, I think, was a Magic the Gathering accessory. Then we did animated spells. At that point, we raised $300,000 in that campaign, which is our biggest to date. And I was like, okay, I know I can do it here. I don't need to be working both of these jobs at the same time. I have a team over at that time, Cardimajigs, which is, we're at 4 people at that point, and we're actually working on getting our own warehouse. And so I was starting to be divided between the two spaces, and basically discussed with my partners there, and said, no, you've got something great here. You should run with it. Like, that is cool. I'm still working with them in terms of like new e-commerce solutions. I still have them develop those sites for me, and we work with them in a lot of different types of initiatives. But pretty much since 2018, I moved on from my position there and focused solely on Hit Point, which then at the end of 2018 was properly incorporated as Hit Point Press, while before it was a sole proprietorship as Cardimajigs.
Really? Okay, awesome. That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, it's actually for quite a long time of doing both at the same time. Why did you do both instead of going, like, why did it take 3 years to go full time into Hit Point Press?
I think a big thing is, while tokens were successful and it was doing well, they're actually very low price point items. It was $1 for one card. And so to sell enough to justify hiring other resources, we'd need to be selling 50,000 cards for just a single resource to justify the resource. And so that's a lot of money for a lot smaller things. A Kickstarter helps really push that. So with 2017 being the first Kickstarter, and by the end of 2018 having done 3 of like officially for that company, that showed us we actually had the revenue to be able to just go off and take it from there.
Okay, got it. So it really was that revenue coming in from Kickstarter that made it so that this was possible for you to go full time, at least feel comfortable doing it on that. Very cool. Very cool. I'm curious when it comes to mainly how do you use Kickstarter as part of your basically your business strategy? Like how does it fit into the business strategy of Hit Point Press?
Okay. So currently, our goal when it comes to Kickstarter is to use it as a pre-sale tool for us. We've gotten to the point where most of our projects are 90 to 100% complete. And really what people are helping us do is just giving us a really nice budget to put into manufacturing. We've upfronted most of those costs that we expect that we would normally get in a Kickstarter, and just said, okay, we're ready to go. And it's just waiting on manufacturing. Okay, here are the files. You can start playing. Here are the PDFs. We can start engaging with people. In the past, I would say probably 2022 prior, it was, okay, we put a bit of into it. We show you that we prove the concept what we're developing, but it's going to take a couple of years to build, and you're helping us get to that point. I think there's been a pretty big shift, especially with how people expect their products a lot faster and a lot sooner. You know, with Amazon, 1 day shipping on things, it's people buy something and they're to be expecting it shortly after. And that still exists on Kickstarter, even though we have those deadlines and dates. So I think it's harder to say, hey, we have a project that's going to be coming out in 2 years. People aren't willing to wait that long anymore, I feel, or at least less likely to do so. So I think there is a benefit to at least having that work done up front in a lot of cases. But in the past, it was very beneficial to get that funding to help us develop those projects and know that people were interested in what it was we were developing.
Got it. I'd love to actually get into the development process, and just a question for later. I'd love to know your thoughts on if someone was just starting out, like, or I guess if you were starting out again, how you would approach using Kickstarter, or if it would be different at all. But for now, like, what goes into actually developing the product? I mean, you're talking about how a lot of it's basically, I think you said like 90% of the way done by the time you launch on Kickstarter. So even going to the ideation stage to once you launch on Kickstarter, like, what is that process?
I think like right now we have that benefit of having a budget available to us to be able to do that and already know some of the market and what the market's interested in. But if we were starting from scratch, the most important part is actually figuring out the audience that exists for that type of product, right? And that's typically the hardest part of the story. It's like, okay, I can figure out a product and I can go develop that product. But if I'm not able to talk about the product or get people engaged in that story that we're developing for the product, it's not really going to hit it off. And so that's the one thing I really want to stress to people. It's all about that audience building. It doesn't matter. Like, yes, you may create the most perfect product out there, but if nobody hears about it or if nobody's engaged, it doesn't exist. And that was one of the problems I had with the agency when we were developing games for Facebook or iPhone, is we could make decent games, but people never played them because we didn't know how to talk about the products. We didn't know how to market or engage with that. And so there are a lot of, free avenues, be it, through Reddit or through socials, where you can start to try to talk to people and see if there's interest in stuff. And it's about figuring out how to talk, how to engage. Some of our early stuff when we did with Cardimajigs and the tokens is like, I engaged with various YouTubers and tried to make tokens for them or try to do things that might be interesting and they would talk about. So that would then bring me traffic on and vice versa. So the biggest thing is figure out your audience, figure out what it is. And if they're interested in the same thing you are. Again, I'm a collector. I like being in that space. So if I build something for collectors, go talk to all your friends. Is this something that's cool to you? Like, would you buy this thing? Yes, cool. Okay, let's start trying to build up an audience and verify that actually makes sense for those people.
Yeah, I'd actually love to get more into the audience building in a moment. I think if we talk about, or I'd love to dive into the Field Guide to Floral Dragons was your latest campaign. I did over 1.1 million. And going back to the question I was asking before, like your process, like maybe let's look at the process for creating Floral Dragons. Like, how did that start? Like, even going back to the ideation stage, because there's a lot of people that are listening to this that are wondering, like, how do these things, come about, right? Like, obviously there's a ton of work. Maybe it's not obvious, but there is a lot of work that goes into creating this. And so just, pulling back the curtain on, at the beginning, how did you come up with the idea for, let's say, Floral Dragons in this case, and then got it to the point of being ready to launch on Kickstarter?
Okay. Well, every project is slightly different in terms of how it gets to that point. Floral Dragons is different in the sense that it is what we call more of like a collaborator project, where someone externally came to us and say, hey, I had this really cool thing. Is that something that interests you? So Kinwald actually approached us and said, hey, I love making these dragons. Is there something we can do with that? Or are you interested in these dragons? And we said, okay, cool. We like what you're developing there. We will pay you to develop an entire line, and we'll get writers to help develop stories and mythos and stat blocks for that. And then through our Patreon, we'll actually send these dragons out monthly. We made actual zines for them on a quarterly basis just to gauge the interest and see if there was people interested in that. If there wasn't, and depending on like the traction or interest that we got, we were going to then adjust the content or see what kind of campaign we would end up with when we released a final book that had everything together. So we knew that through our Patreon, we were able to help fund the production of the final book by using that audience to prepay and generate that pre-interest and then go towards the final product there. For something like Humblewood.
That's cool, by the way. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
We printed these in-house and we made them. We actually had our own binding machine at one point. We don't have the production space, but it was cool to test and experiment with that kind of stuff. And so stuff like this is like us experimenting. Does it work? If people are interested, great. We're going to go try to like make this a full thing. If there was an interest in the Patreon and people are like, this is falling flat, cool. We can move on, not having invested too much money into that. And everybody understands that people weren't really that interested. For us, with something like Humblewood, that project started off as a deck of reference cards with just cute animals, role-playing as like adventurers and different things. And eventually it became this whole world as we had writers start developing the story behind the cards. And we're like, maybe we make an adventure with this. Maybe, okay, let's flesh out the lore a little bit more. And so it, early projects didn't have as much structure, but kind of developed and became these big projects. While stuff like Floral Dragons became in saying, okay, well, our end goal is a Kickstarter. We're going to start developing this, and with developing that audience in mind over a year and see if we can engage on that.
So it took about a year.
So we started this in 2022. So the art started back in 2022 with a full release in 2023 of 4 issues, with then the campaign that followed at the beginning of this year.
Got it. So when did it get to the point where you said, all right, we're going to do a Kickstarter for this?
We got to issue 3, and basically 6 months out is like where we like to say, okay, is this a thing and we're happy to do it? Cool. We know, because we need to plan for the marketing 3 months prior to really hammer in that audience, which is where it came to Launch Boom for the first time, where we actually started working with your platform to build that funnel and really pull in all those sources into that one place.
Which was awesome to be able to work with your team. So have there been other ideas in the past where you've gone through some type of test and then you decided that, no, you're not going to launch it on Kickstarter?
There's a lot of projects that are sitting in a queue. In terms of just like active projects at Hitpoint Press, there's probably 20 different active projects in terms of just like at different phases of completion or like experimentation. But like ones that we have dropped were like well before Apple had like their Apple AirTags. We were looking at experimenting with the tile tags and making a card divider for Magic the Gathering decks, which you could just put inside of your deck. And so if someone stole your deck, he could potentially ping off of someone else's tile device. The biggest issue we had with that is just that there wasn't enough people to really justify or get that data to make sure that if your deck was stolen, can we track it? Maybe that's something to revisit now that we have Apple's tags, and, there could be a cool opportunity there. But little things like that where we're experimenting with things and seeing if there is general interest in that.
Is there, so you were talking a little bit earlier about, if you were just starting out, or if someone was just starting out, how they might approach things. And you were talking about the importance of audience. But I want to ask the question again, because you just talked about this process of being able to test and experiment. And because you have this big audience, you have that advantage of being able to, let's say, like leverage that audience to be able to figure out if there is legs behind this idea, which is awesome, right? If you were just starting out, or if you're talking to a creator that is just starting out, is there a way for them to, how would you recommend that they test their ideas to figure out if it has legs to be able to go on Kickstarter?
It depends on the type of product to begin with. Like, one of the biggest considerations in the, like, this was a stat from Kickstarter, but like 70% of TTRPGs fund on Kickstarter. And so if you're building a TTRPG, you know that success is generally higher than most other audiences in that space, because the TTRPG audience understands if they want something that is not Hasbro or Paizo or any of the big names that are developing things, is that you're going to be getting it from a crowdfunding source, be it Kickstarter, BackerKit, or one of the other ones. If it's a different type of product, take a look at if that's even the place where you need to be marketing or talking about it. But assuming that Kickstarter was the place for that product, it's really about talking to people, developing a Discord community, developing an email list to really just kind of get that interest. Now, obviously, it's hard without money to do something like a mailing campaign where you can mail people stuff. But free PDFs, free content, I've always found it been a really good way to at least get people to look at what you're developing, maybe get some feedback. And that's the biggest part, is you want to get feedback from people. So if you get a service like MailChimp and you get a simple Shopify website and you have it so that way people can come download a preview of your document, and then maybe through MailChimp it emails them asking them for feedback or support, or just talking about what it is you're building and trying to create that community engagement, because the people who are engaging and talking are going to be those fans that are going to be wanting to support you long term on that kind of stuff. And so if you can start developing that, I think the biggest thing for us when I started Cardimajigs was, while I created physical tokens, I did also create free PDFs. And then I went onto Reddit and said, hey, you want to print free tokens for the latest set? Here's some tokens. I would generate those for people. And I know there's a lot of people on Reddit who generate and submit their stuff for free so people can engage. That's really what you're trying to do, is trying to find your audience and where they live.
Very cool. Yeah, I love the story of how you used Reddit at the beginning. I think that's an awesome way of getting feedback from the market in a free, only costs us your time. Once you get to later stages, or if you have budget as well, I think you can use advertising as a method to see what if the product has interest in the market as well. But I love hearing those like very like free ways of also doing it. Going to the marketing side of things, was this prior to Floral Dragons? Had you done well? I guess first off, can you talk about how you approached the pre-launch for Floral Dragons, and was that different than the previous launches?
Yeah, it was quite different actually. Pre-marketing wasn't really the main focus at Hit Point Press in terms of like when we were pushing things. We would say maybe we'd be like, hey, a month before, an email and a social blast saying, hey, we're doing this thing, it's coming out, take a look, and we would talk about it. We would do almost no PPC pre-marketing, and a lot of it was influencer marketing and email during the campaign. It's only been in the past couple of years where we really started to engage with PPC and trying to hit a lot of the people who normally we don't reach through our current sources. I would say at the start of last year, we started investigating that a little bit more, trying to build out the audience and say, okay, we started building spreadsheets and saying, okay, if we have this many people in here, what do these people translate to in terms of the end of the campaign? And we basically assume, like last year we did Big Bad's Kickstarter, and we had only 1,000 people on it. And usually that was like our baseline. It's like, we got 1,000 people, we're happy to go run a Kickstarter. But with the one we ran at the end of the year, which was the Fable Makers, we made sure to get 5,000 people sitting on that campaign because we were like, okay, let's really focus hard on that, which means a more successful day one launch, and which ended up with a $450,000 campaign compared to Big Bads, which reached 350. Now, with Floral Dragons, we actually had generated an audience of over 10,000 through your platform, which 3,000 being those dedicated leads, and then another 7 or so being the regular leads, which led to like the big boom that it got right at the start and eventually at the end. It accounted for like 30% of the total traffic was through that pre-marketing audience, and most of them came at the start, which really helped for a successful campaign long term.
Are you finding that Kickstarter is becoming more difficult, or is it the same as when you launched your first campaign in 2017 in terms of being able to, let's say, like attract backers?
No, I just think it's different. It's different people, different audiences. You have to just figure out how you're talking to each time.
Do you mean just based off of the product that you're launching?
Yeah, every product is different, right? And so it's hard to say that Kickstarter is harder. It is just that every product is different. But also, I would say there was this on I think it's Board Game Geek. There's like this thread that talks about all the campaigns that are being run and the number of like $1 million Kickstarters pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID was like 5 TTRPG Kickstarters hitting $1 million. Post is over 30. And so, if anything, while the space is successful, it has been the most successful it has been ever, but there's so many competing people also competing for those same dollars. So while it may be more competitive in terms of trying to get higher goals, but people are able to get those and bring that audience in. It just means everybody's working hard to make sure that we have the highest quality products out there, and everyone's competing with that in mind. It's like we're all working together to make each other better, but also competing at the same time.
That's really crazy. I actually didn't know that stat in terms of the amount of $1 million launches in the TTRPG space pre and post COVID. COVID was a wild time. It really changed a lot of things for sure. It was a huge spike in terms of campaigns launching and interest in Kickstarter during that time. Makes sense. Overall, the whole e-commerce space, online shopping space just exploded. And the after effects have still been positive, I would say, generally in the crowdfunding ecosystem that we've seen. So what's next for Hit Point Press? What are you focusing on next?
The next project that we're working on is actually a role-playing card game called One Last Fight. It is very monochromatic. It's red, black, white colors, and it focuses on pre-generated characters that people can then tackle a deck and develop the story of this one last fight. They're after this like final boss, and they've been adventuring for years, and they know that this is the end, right? And so it's rogue-like, where you're gonna die, you're gonna try again, you can keep going, and you can develop a story, and the cards will ask you questions while also giving you challenges to try to attack at the same time. So we find that it's a cool way to figure out also, like, if you want to use it to develop a starting point for a new campaign, you could, but also to like end off a project. You've been doing a thing. Hey, we now are going to have something fun and just like tinker around, play a little board game with these characters we've created. We're starting to build our launch boom for that at the moment and all the little assets. So we're at the point where we're actually developing all the files for manufacturing and getting that out there. We've actually just submitted files to printers to develop the advanced copies so that we can send those off to reviewers and stuff. As we understand, this is a different product. So while this is still a role-playing product, it is not a 5th edition role-playing product. So it's going to be a completely different audience. D&D commands over 50% of the market. We understand by doing this product, it's not going to attract all of them. And so who can we attract? Who can we talk to? We've been slowly tinkering with indie games with, like, if I Were Lich Man with Lucian Khan, and we have some other titles we're going to be working on, like later next year with some other creators. But we're trying to see what else exists in other spaces. So we're not just beholden to 5e. As we know, 5e changes and adapts, and we'll change and adapt with it. But we also want to see what else we can kind of experiment with, because at a point we're going to be like, we're good. We're also working on our own system called Shift, which we're planning on launching earlier next year, as well as what's the third campaign? We have 3 campaigns planned: Floral Dragons, One Last Fight. I say that there's like 20 projects, so I have to figure out which one is the last one for the year.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a simple one: Scroungecraft. Scroungecraft is actually the next one. Is a jigsaw puzzle Kickstarter. Now, the reason why we're doing jigsaw puzzles is because it is a completely different space that has a huge market and audience, and it's easy for us to get into because we have already developed such gorgeous art for all our other projects. We can just develop a really cool line for jigsaw puzzles.
Yes, please show it.
So this would be a follow-up. We actually did one before the test. We raised $18,000 just to make a manufacturing run, but we basically use high fantasy art that we've used for other projects with
It's awesome.
industry artists, and so there's some really cool pieces.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
But yeah, well, this is the fun little experimentation stuff, and what we like doing with projects like this is experiment with building audiences. We actually are going to be hiring a new marketing person in the next week or so, and they will look at this and use this as a test to see and learn how we do a Kickstarter versus showing them with a big campaign, which has so many bells and whistles. Here, instead, we say, here's the basics, here's how it works. And then also, what can we do to experiment and audience build here? Something like this, we'll say, hey, we don't use Pinterest currently, but maybe we'll use Pinterest to engage in that audience. Is there any leeway into that to then explore for other projects? Start with something small. And so this is our start with something small, an experiment project. And then One Last Fight is, okay, we've got a cool game. We're going to try to audience build slightly differently, leading into Shift again, which is another non-5e product. Then in March of next year, Humblewood 2, which is back to 5e. So we keep going back to 5e as being our stable base, and then we experiment and then go back to stable base.
Very cool. That's smart. That's really smart. Is it typically like 3 launches a year? Is that what you're aiming for?
Last year we did 5. But the first 3 were, the first 2 were tester projects where, again, were experimental. And so we had Constellation, which was just a collection of zines, indie zines. If I Were a Lich Man, which was the collaboration with Lucian Khan, 3 Jewish games, funny Jewish games, role-playing games. Then we had Big Bad, which was the 5th edition book, which was a compilation of Patreon releases we had done over the course of a couple of years where we did new boss monsters every month. And then we did Frame-A-Jigs, where we created a card frame for trading cards, which I have one over here. What's cool about it is it's a frame you can see in the back.
Oh, yeah.
And then to get the card in and out,
yeah.
slide it through the top.
Oh, that's cool.
And you can pull out the card, swap it with something else, put it back in with ease, and put it back on your wall. This is something I created because I wanted this personally. And so most of my team is building the books and stuff like that. And every once in a while, I'll have fun making something like this. And then I'll say, hey, we're running a Kickstarter for it. I know we're working on a version that actually works for tarot cards to work on that audience because a lot of our cards are tarot size. So all the animated cards, we actually made an animated tarot deck. And so we try to explore and talk to multiple different audiences at once when it comes to a campaign. So Floral Dragons, while it is a 5e book, one of the biggest things is we really focused hard on it being a dragon book, similar to that like Dragonology or something like that, where anybody can pick up this book. You don't need to know Dungeons & Dragons to pick up Floral Dragons. It just happens to also have Dungeons & Dragons stats and rules, should you be interested in that. And so I think that was really important because it allowed people to come in and be like, well, I just like cool dragons. I like cool stories. And the art is gorgeous, right? So we got the florals, the botanicals, and dragons part with a side of roleplay. And so that's kind of how we are trying to explore new projects is, okay, it's not just the D&D audience. It is, or roleplay. It's roleplay plus metaphysical. It's roleplay plus puzzles. It's roleplay plus something else.
Right. I love the way that you think about audiences in general and also the experimentation. It's really, really cool. All right, a few more questions. I'm very curious, like, what is the breakdown of revenue? Don't get. Let's pull up your books. No, I'm just kidding. But mainly what I'm talking about is like the distribution between like Kickstarter versus everything else, like e-commerce. Is it in retail? Just understanding how that, like, roughly speaking, how that breaks down.
So what's interesting is we didn't really focus too hard on retail for many years. Actually, it was last year we really started to pay attention to it. And so for us, our two pillars were Kickstarters and e-com, which depending on the year, e-com or Kickstarters can blow that out of the water. But on some years, it's e-com that keeps us afloat, depending on how we did stuff. Like 2022 was a really strong year because we had the Fool's Gold Kickstarter, which reached 2.4 million. So we said, cool, in 2020, or that was 2021. In 2022, we only ran one Kickstarter, which raised 400,000. So our e-com totally defeated that. But so, maybe on average, like 30 to 40% e-com, the rest is Kickstarter on an average year. But our goal is through wholesale and distro to kind of make it a third pillar and kind of just go 30, 30, 30. So that way they're all supporting each other. Because we know some companies, they say, hey, we make all our money in wholesale distro. Kickstarter's fun money. And I'm like, Kickstarter's fun. Kickstarter is new product to support long-term into e-com. So how we would do is the Kickstarter funds we get, say if it was $1 million, cool, the production, development, all that, maybe 700 or something like that. And then we say, okay, we have this 300,000. Usually that 300,000 go into more inventory to then support e-commerce for the next couple of years because we needed that to be a long tail on things. So we worked on that together to kind of develop a process so that we weren't just relying on Kickstarters to be these big funding events. We were using Kickstarters to set us up for success long term.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And one last question is how long does like a product last in terms of interest? Like what would you say is like the product life cycle?
That's why it's always good to continue to build because people are always going to be looking for something new, especially if you have an engaged, active audience. They're very about the first thing. They want to buy something else the next time they come. It's not like something where, if someone buys coffee pods, they're going to always come back for coffee pods and you don't need to create something new all the time. Maybe a new flavor is kind of cool and fun, but you can get them back on that basic. But for us, it's like, for example, the Humblewood line. The Humblewood book still sells well and basically comparatively to like a Kickstarter launch, the book will sell maybe 10 to 20% of its heyday back in 2019. Still good numbers, but it's not 2019 numbers. But, we release a new book, again, it spikes, and it also spikes for the first book. And so the benefits there is that it continues to engage people long term. So anytime there's a new product, it brings back people to that first product, and then it kind of acts as a wave down the line. So it's always good to introduce new products or modify products to generate or make it new again. So one of the product ideas we had at the start was the Deck of Many Things is one of our most popular products. People really like that deck for Dungeons and Dragons. And in 2017, our first Kickstarter had one. In 2018, we had the animated one. And we were like, oh, let's just release a new Deck of Many Things every year because it's one of our top sellers. People just love the deck, period. They'll buy multiple copies. It's kind of like tarot decks, right? And so they'll always want to engage in that. And so, the Fable Makers Deck of Many Things, we just released a new one there. And we actually have another one in the chamber just waiting to be released. But we're kind of still spacing it out and figuring that because we know that people are always looking for that new thing and they want to engage new, slightly different things with those audiences. So now that's based on current audience. If we're able to grow and develop new audiences and show them old products or go into new markets, then we're able to really expand that. So like we were, like I mentioned, we were in Japan earlier this year showing off our products there. They had never seen the animated cards before, and so that was cool, but it wasn't in Japanese, so they couldn't purchase it. But if we translated it, that's a whole new market that I could then re-up on something that's old and bring it back to new again. So those are always considerations when it comes to products. Is there other places we could promote it or bring it to again get that new surge for that product? Humblewood just recently got translated into German and is now available through Pegasus. We're actually going to be going to Essen later this year and see what other kind of opportunities there are to translate because there's always going to be new audiences to really re-engage. And there might be greater success somewhere else than we never thought, and really bring reinvigorated interest into those products. I think the biggest thing for us is stuff like the animated cards. Still to this date, we haven't seen anybody really try to compete with us on that product line. And so it does well no matter where we bring it to.
Awesome. Really, really, really appreciate you being on here. I learned a ton. I love learning about everything, especially the business side of things and how you set this up and what your plans are for the future. So it was really awesome talking to you, and I appreciate you coming on.
No problem. I appreciate you chatting with you today. And if I could, I just want to shout out my team, because without them, none of this is possible. They help me manage the projects and make sure that things go into manufacturing, or, whenever I say I have a new project idea, it's like they're the ones helping me kind of bring this to fruition. And they're excellent. And also my partner, Andrea, she helps me a lot with, refining my ideas and developing what cool things come out in the future.
Love it. Shout out to the Hit Point Press team as well. And Rico, thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.